My name is Marcus. I've been working in this store for over 2 years. It's been a few weeks since this happened. At first, it didn't even cross my mind to post it on the internet. But after this event, I found myself looking at similar stories that people have shared, and I decided to share mine. It started out like any other night, expecting another stretch of peace and boredom. There was something oddly comforting about these shifts. The whole atmosphere, the smells, everything was as it should be. These late-night hours were supposed to be predictable. Empty aisles, the occasional customer looking for cigarettes or snacks, and long moments of nothing but me and my thoughts. At first, everything went exactly as expected. I restocked some shelves, cleaned the counter, and sipped my coffee, watching the parking lot through the glass door. I liked the stillness. Working alone made me feel at ease, in control. But the store's isolation, the emptiness around me, could also feel unsettling if I let my mind wander too much. I told myself it was just another night and got back to my tasks. The hours passed slowly, but I was used to that. My only companions were the ceiling lights and the faint buzzing from the cooler in the back. Midnight was approaching when the front door chimed. I looked up from the counter, expecting the usual, a quick transaction, no conversation. Instead, a man in his 40s walked in. He seemed normal at first glance, just another night owl passing through. But as he approached, something about his presence put me on edge. The man walked up to the counter without browsing, which struck me as odd. He stood too close, just inside my personal space, and smiled too much. I could smell the faint odor of cigarettes on him, as if he'd been chain-smoking outside. I told myself not to read too much into it. At first, he asked normal things, whether the coffee was fresh, if I had change for a 20. But then his questions shifted. "Do you always work alone?" he asked, leaning on the counter. His voice was casual, but the words carried weight. I shrugged it off, said something vague, but he didn't stop. "What time do you leave?" he asked next, tilting his head slightly as if my answer really mattered to him. That question made my skin crawl. I forced a smile, hoping it didn't look as fake as it felt, and tried to steer the conversation away. But he stayed, watching me too closely, his eyes not leaving mine. After what felt like forever, he finally left. I watched as he walked out the door, the bell jingling faintly behind him. Minutes passed, then an hour, and things started to settle again. I returned to my tasks, restocking the drink cooler and tidying up the shelves. But no matter how hard I tried to focus, the man's words echoed in my mind. "Do you always work alone?" Just when I began to convince myself I'd never see him again, I caught movement outside the front window. My stomach dropped. There he was, lingering at the far edge of the parking lot, just beyond the reach of the store's lights. He wasn't coming inside this time. He was just standing there. He stayed close to the shadows, just far enough that the security cameras wouldn't pick him up. It was deliberate, calculated, the kind of behavior that told me he knew what he was doing. I tried to ignore him, telling myself it was just a coincidence, but I couldn't stop glancing out the window. Every time I looked, he was still there. He never moved closer, but he never left either. That's when I made the decision to lock the front door. It was against store policy, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was the right thing to do. I stepped up to the door, turned the lock, and hoped it would be enough. The hours dragged on, each tick of the clock louder than the last. I tried to keep myself busy, but my focus kept slipping. I'd glance at the window, only to find the parking lot empty. Then, just as I thought the worst had passed, the phone rang. I picked it up, expecting it to be my manager, but the voice on the other end made my blood run cold. "You locked the door," the man said, his tone light and playful, as if we were sharing a joke. "That wasn't very nice." My heart pounded as I looked at the security monitors, searching for any sign of him. But the cameras showed nothing. He wasn't outside anymore. Panic surged through me. I hung up the phone, my hands trembling, and rushed to check the back door. I wedged a chair under the handle, desperate to put some kind of barrier between me and whatever was happening. The buzzing of the ceiling light seemed louder now, pressing down on me as I tried to catch my breath. I told myself I was safe, but deep down, I knew that was a lie. I stood by the back door for what felt like an eternity, listening for anything. Footsteps, voices, even a knock. but the only sound was the dull buzz of the overhead lights. My mind raced. I knew he was still out there somewhere, waiting, watching. I dragged a metal chair from the break area and jammed it under the back door's handle. It wasn't much, but it gave me a small sense of control, a sliver of security. I stood there, gripping the edge of the door, listening to my own heartbeat thudding in my ears. I tried to steady my breathing, forcing myself to think logically. Maybe it was just a bad prank. Maybe he would get bored and leave. But that hope was shattered the moment the lights flickered once, then went out completely. The darkness swallowed the store whole, leaving me standing in a black void. My breathing grew shallow as I tried to get my bearings. My hands fumbled along the wall, searching for my flashlight, but I couldn't find it. Then came the sound. 2 loud knocks. They echoed through the store, sharp and deliberate, as if he was striking the glass door with something solid. For a moment, I thought about running outside, but something told me he was waiting for that. Instead, I made a decision. I bolted for the basement. My shoes slapped against the tiled floor as I sprinted to the back. I threw open the basement door, nearly tripping on the steps, and slammed it shut behind me. My hands shook as I locked the door, praying it would hold. The basement was colder than I remembered, the air heavy and stale. I leaned against the door, trying to calm myself, but it was impossible. Every sound, every creak and shift felt like a threat. The knocks came again, muffled this time, but insistent. I knew the man was still out there. Panic set in as I reached for my phone, only to realize it was still on the counter upstairs. I cursed under my breath, feeling the walls close in around me. There was no way out, no way to call for help. Minutes felt like hours. Then, just as I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I heard a strange sound, a pop, followed by a crackling noise. It reminded me of a taser. My mind raced, imagining the worst. The silence stretched on. I didn't know if I was safer hiding or if I needed to act before things got worse. With a shaky breath, I unlocked the door and crept upstairs, every step careful and slow. When I reached the top of the stairs, the store was eerily quiet. I peeked around the corner, expecting the worst, but instead saw the red and blue glow of police lights spilling through the front windows. Relief washed over me, but my hands still shook as I stepped out into the store. A police officer stood by the counter, holding the man's arm behind his back. "Got him," the officer said casually, as if this was just another routine stop. He explained that he was driving by, heard strange noises, and decided to check things out. The officer said the man had tried to force the door open, but was subdued with a taser before he could get far. I could barely process what I was hearing. All I knew was that it was over. I thanked the officer, locked the doors, and went through the motions of closing the store. But the fear hadn't fully left me, even as I turned off the lights and stepped into the cool night air. The drive home felt surreal, as if I was floating outside my own body. When I finally stepped into my apartment, the tension in my chest loosened. I locked the door behind me and sat down on the couch. I was a little reflective, but I was safe in my house. I sat hunched over my desk, the glow of my laptop the only source of light in the room. The flickering desk lamp fought to stay on, casting jittery shadows along the walls. My brain felt fried, and the forgotten assignment due tomorrow loomed large on the screen. Outside, the dorm hallway was silent, eerily so. Most of the other students were either asleep or somewhere else, leaving the building unsettlingly empty. Every tap on my keyboard felt too loud, as if the silence around me amplified every click. I leaned back, rubbing my tired eyes, and stared at the words on the screen, hoping they'd start making sense. But they didn't. The flicker from the lamp was getting worse. I slapped it gently, hoping that would steady the light, but it only dimmed briefly before sputtering back to life. I sighed. It was going to be a long night. Frustration won over. I needed a break and a snack, anything to jolt me back into focus. I threw on a hoodie, grabbed my phone, and stepped into the hallway, which was even more unsettling than I expected. The fluorescent lights above flickered intermittently, creating a strange rhythm of light and shadow. I stood still for a second, expecting to hear the usual late-night murmur of conversations from behind closed doors, but there was nothing. The whole floor felt empty. Shrugging off the strange feeling, I made my way to the common area. The faint hum of the vending machines greeted me as I approached, and the sight of candy bars and sodas behind the glass felt like a small comfort. I slid a few coins into the machine, the clink of metal echoing louder than it should have in the empty room. Snack in hand, I decided to take a quick detour past the library. Part of me was still hoping I could catch it open, maybe borrow a book that would help with the assignment. I wasn't optimistic, but it felt like a good excuse to walk off my nerves. When I reached the library, though, the heavy wooden doors were already locked, the entire building swallowed in darkness. I pressed my face against the glass, trying to peer inside. Nothing moved, just rows of bookshelves buried in shadow. I was about to turn away when a flicker of movement caught my eye, a shadow slipping past the window. I squinted, leaning closer to the glass, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. Probably nothing, I told myself. Just my imagination. I picked up the pace as I made my way back toward the dorm. The campus paths were empty, the streetlights casting long, uneven shadows across the pavement. It was the kind of quiet that makes you second-guess every sound. Then I heard it, footsteps. They echoed off the walls of nearby buildings, faint at first but unmistakable. I stopped and turned around. There was no one there, just the empty path behind me, bathed in the dim glow of the streetlights. I started walking again, quicker this time. The footsteps followed, matching my pace, stopping when I stopped. I glanced over my shoulder every few steps, expecting to see someone, anyone, behind me. But there was nothing but empty space. As I neared the dorm's parking lot, my nerves prickled with unease. Something about the night felt too still, as if the campus was holding its breath. That's when I noticed it. A car I'd never seen before, parked at the edge of the lot. It looked out of place, the kind of old, beaten car you wouldn't expect on campus. The paint was chipped and the headlights were off, though the engine hummed faintly, a low, steady growl that made my skin crawl. I kept walking, trying not to look at it, but every instinct in me screamed to pay attention. As I passed, the engine revved briefly, though the car didn't move. I squinted toward the driver's seat, but the windows were too dark to see inside. I quickened my pace, pretending I hadn't noticed. The hum of the engine stayed steady, not following but not leaving either, just there, lingering like a threat. Back in my dorm room, I slammed the door behind me, my breath shaky as I leaned against it. I tried to shake off the strange encounter outside, telling myself it was probably nothing, just someone waiting for a friend, right? I grabbed my phone from the desk and saw the screen light up, several missed calls and unread notifications. My heart sank as I scrolled through them. There were texts from my sister asking if I was okay. Another message read, "Where are you? I thought you said you were going to the library." I frowned. I hadn't told her that. In fact, I hadn't spoken to her at all that night. Confused, I typed out a quick response asking her what she meant. Before I could hit send, a sharp rattling sound echoed through the room. The window pane, right next to my desk, shook violently, as if something or someone was on the other side. I froze for a second and slowly reached for the curtain. With trembling fingers, I pulled back the curtain just enough to peek outside. The campus beyond the glass was dark and still, as if frozen in time. But the window rattled again, harder this time, as if something was pressing against it, testing the lock. I leaned closer, trying to make out any shapes in the darkness. But there was nothing. No figure, no movement, just the eerie quiet of the night pressing in on all sides. A gust of wind? Maybe. But the way the glass shook felt deliberate, purposeful. It was as if something unseen wanted to be let in. The rattling stopped abruptly, leaving behind a suffocating silence, and I forced myself to breathe slowly, trying to calm down. That's when the door handle behind me jiggled, just once, followed by a soft click. The door to my dorm room eased open, and I braced myself, fear pooling in my stomach. Then my sister's face appeared in the doorway, a sheepish grin on her lips. "Sorry, I didn't mean to freak you out." Relief flooded through me so fast it left me lightheaded. What are you doing here?" I asked, still catching my breath. She held up a bag of snacks, the exact ones I'd forgotten to grab from the vending machine earlier. "Figured you'd need these," she said with a shrug. "And when I saw the lights go out, I thought I should check on you." I laughed, the sound shaky but real. You scared the hell out of me, I admitted, collapsing onto the bed. She sat down next to me, munching on a candy bar. Everything okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the lingering unease. Yeah, just a weird night, I guess. Even when we sat down together, with the door securely closed and the snacks between us, I was still a little scared, but it gradually passed. We talked for about 10 minutes and she left. I don't know if it was just a coincidence, but the footsteps that seemed to be following me in that car, which I'd never seen before, didn't quite fit. I tried to forget it and went to bed. I'm Jesse, a mom in my 30s with a 5-year-old who keeps me busy from morning till night. I've always been independent, handling things on my own without much fuss. I like to think I'm cautious, but not the kind of person who freaks out over every little thing. I've had to get used to managing situations by myself, and honestly, it's never been a problem. In that night, I had just put my son to bed, and for a rare moment, everything felt perfectly quiet. No cartoons humming from the TV, no toys strewn across the floor, just the kind of stillness that I didn't realize I craved until it arrived. I went through my routine like always, checking the locks on the front and back doors, making sure the windows were sealed shut. My hands traced the latches to confirm they were secure. It was something I did every night, but tonight there was an unusual comfort in the process, as if the ritual itself promised to hold the night at bay. I moved slowly from room to room, taking an extra moment at each window, the cold glass beneath my fingertips reminding me how crisp the night had become. There was one window I ignored, the basement window. It was too small, too low to the ground to be of any real concern. I had passed by it many times without a second thought. Even tonight, with my heightened need for security, it seemed irrelevant. What kind of person would crawl through such a tiny space? I dismissed it without even pausing, heading back upstairs where the warmth of my bed waited. The silence stretched as I turned off the last of the lights, casting the house into darkness. I pulled the blanket up to my chin, listening to the deep, steady hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen and the faint rustling of the wind outside. The night seemed to breathe, but it was a calm breath, reassuring, and for once, I felt ready to rest. Minutes ticked by, but sleep remained just out of reach. My thoughts drifted to my son, tucked away safely in his bed just down the hall. I tried to shake off the faint unease creeping over me. It wasn't a sharp fear, just a subtle prickling sense that I couldn't place, like the air in the room had shifted slightly without reason. I told myself it was just the cold night playing tricks on my senses. The clock on my nightstand glowed dimly. I closed my eyes again, determined to sleep, but my mind kept searching for something that wasn't there. I could feel it. The same strange stillness outside seemed to have slipped into the house, coating every room with an uncomfortable quiet. While I lay there, willing sleep to take over, a man was slipping into the house. He had crawled through that tiny basement window, just as smoothly as a shadow slides under a door. I couldn't have known it then, but at that very moment, he was already moving, trying to find his bearings in the dark. In the quiet, my son stirred. I didn't hear him get out of bed, didn't notice the soft patter of his bare feet as he wandered downstairs. He had always been a curious child, never afraid of strangers or new faces. Just a little boy fascinated by the world around him, no matter how dangerous it might be. He thought it was someone familiar, a visitor perhaps, or someone there to play. He stepped closer, his little voice breaking the silence. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice light and innocent. The man didn't respond. Upstairs, I was drifting in and out of light sleep when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of my son's voice. At first, I assumed he was talking to one of his toys. He often did that when he woke up in the middle of the night, lost in imaginary worlds. I told myself it was nothing unusual, just a little boy amusing himself. But as the seconds passed, the unease returned, stronger this time. There was something different about his voice, something that felt off. It was too clear, too directed, like he was talking to someone. I strained to listen, and the longer I focused, the more certain I became he wasn't alone. I slipped out of bed slowly, careful not to make a sound. I moved toward the door, the wooden floor cool under my feet, and began inching my way toward the sound of his voice. As I got closer, I could hear the subtle rhythm of another presence, a shuffle, a quick breath, the rustle of clothing. It wasn't just my son down there. Someone else was with him. As I reached the top of the stairs, I could see the faintest glow from the hallway nightlight casting long shadows across the floor. My son's voice carried up from the bottom of the staircase, cheerful and light. I stopped for a moment, frozen by an eerie sensation, like the air between us had thinned, warning me that something wasn't right. Then I saw him, just past the base of the stairs, his dark figure partially hidden by the dim light. He wasn't moving, just watching my son with an unsettling stillness. The sight hit me like a shockwave. This was no imagined fear. Someone was inside my house. The man looked up and our eyes met. In that single moment, everything felt razor sharp. My mind emptied of everything except one thought: get him out. My breath caught in my chest, and I couldn't think beyond that one impulse. I glanced to my side, spotted the lamp sitting on the small table, and grabbed it without a second thought. It was heavy in my hand, grounding me. For a brief second, the man didn't move. We stood there, two strangers locked in a quiet standoff, with my son standing between us, oblivious to the danger. The man's eyes flicked toward the basement window. In a single, fluid motion, he turned and bolted, pushing past my son without a second glance. I rushed forward, heart hammering, gripping the lamp so tightly my fingers ached. But the intruder moved faster than I expected, sprinting down the stairs and toward the small window. He reached the basement window and twisted his body through it with an agility that seemed impossible, disappearing into the cold night outside. I chased him all the way to the window, but by the time I reached it, he was gone. All I could see was the dark, empty street beyond, silent and still, as though nothing had happened. For a moment, I stood there, panting, gripping the edge of the window frame, feeling the cold air sting my face. The open window felt like a gaping wound in the house, and I couldn't look away from it. The man had come in through that space, so small I hadn't even considered it, and slipped away just as easily. I slammed the basement window shut and locked it, my hands trembling as I twisted the latch into place. My breath was short and uneven, and I forced myself to stand still to slow my thoughts. I needed to be calm for my son. I rushed upstairs and found him standing where I had left him, puzzled but unharmed. He looked up at me with wide, curious eyes. "Who was that?" he asked, not understanding the gravity of what had just happened. I knelt down, checking him over, hands running over his small frame to ensure nothing was wrong. He was perfectly fine, as though none of it had affected him. I told him it was time to go back to bed, guiding him gently down the hall and tucking him in once more. I walked through every room, checking every door and window again, making sure each one was locked and sealed. But no amount of reassurance could shake the sense that something had shifted. Even the familiar creaks of the floorboards seemed foreign, like they belonged to a stranger's house. When I returned to my bed, exhaustion hit me all at once. I lay back down and stared at the ceiling, listening to the deep quiet that had settled over the house once more. I pulled the blanket over me and closed my eyes, hoping sleep would take me. But even in the stillness, I knew the truth. No matter how many times I checked the locks, no matter how tightly I sealed the windows, some part of me would always be listening for the sound of that basement window sliding open again.